Evolving barbaric hieroglyphs, I spit my gifts, shift your surface with vernacular skill. The rawest live, touching down like meteors, none other than black gods. Stones in my timepiece coming from black stars. Negativity for keep far away from doors. Single-mindedly destroying the ops and the odds. Just another warrior's quest. The past may get rest. Demons coming for my crown, get beheaded like the next. These blessings never threats, just to verbalize a message, catching energies of critics. All the Atari get deaded. Pray I stay alert on the field, be skillmatic in anything my enemies deal. Be dead actions, I proceed just like I lead beneath it. So many seas to win. It's our time to align stars. So spirits lead. Who could war with me? Catastrophically or audibly, given no choice by God's law. I'm Lucifer on streets.
Before we even get started, let me just express that I do want us to build with each other as we talk about the information. My intent is not to create controversy or to, create drama, but basically to inform the people and for us to have a broader perspective in terms of how we view things that goes on. So with that, let me go ahead and share the screen and we get started here. So within the Black Panther Party, we refer to our trifecta, which is defining, developing, and defending. In addressing that, we want to define what's in the best interest of our people. We must first be able to perceive it. And that's what we're going to really jump into in the first part of today's discussion in terms of the perception element. To develop what's in the best interest of our people, we must actively pursue that development. And to defend what's in the best interest of our people, we must readily preserve it. So keep those in mind, keep that trifecta in mind, and that in essence applies to everything that we do. So we must be able to operate within this trifecta, within these elements. So as we talk about the logics of warfare, we want to go into that. So today, let's briefly discuss what perception makes warfare logical, how this process is pursued on the world stage, and then examine the terms in which it is preserved for the maintenance of power, because the whole discussion is centered around power. When we talk about warfare, that's in essence what we're getting into, power. And I want to start off with this quote here. Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. I'm not sure about the universe. And the reason why that's important goes into the aspect of perception. What I accidentally did here. Hold on a second. All right, let me keep going. Are y'all able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. All right. So, what do the two things have in common? And we're going to discuss this from the position of perception. And I want us to dive into this as a collective, and then we kind of talk about the parameters of how this plays into warfare from there. So one of y'all tell me, what do these two things have in common? Anybody?
It both mentally take you to the same place.
Good response. Mentally take you to the same place. And again, in looking at it from the position of perception, that is the whole intent, and that's the point. When you talk about this light spectrum, which is referred to as black, the only thing that in essence is in common between the word and the light spectrum is how we identify with it. So in other words, the word blue, in essence, could be this light spectrum. It is the commonality or the common connection and definitions that created the connection between the word and the image. And that is different according to where you are anywhere in the world. It's very important to start off with that, because again, when we talk about perception and we talk about perceiving power and perceiving warfare, it's necessary to do that in order to define. So as we go into defining who we are, we have to be able to first identify how we perceive ourselves. So, for instance, going into the next section, using the reference we just did, what are these things? What do these two images have in common? Somebody. Anyone gonna dare to answer? Earl, you smiling?
I have an answer, but it is not the most thought out answer.
That's fine. That's fine. It's again, we're talking about perception.
They're both Africans.
Both Africans. Good response. Now, one thing to say about that, again, talking about perception, a lot of people, when they look at these images, the one on the right, they would say African American. The one on the left, they may just say, oh, he's from the continent, right? Mind you, who created the perception of Africans? Because a lot of times, especially if you go back during the period, and this is supposed to be an image of Shaka Zulu, by the way, it's obviously an actor, but it's an image. Let's just say we all recognize this to be a Zulu. Zulus would not consider themselves African. Africa is a continent, but a people is based upon the tribes, the customs, the way of life in the land that they live on, in their particular climate, in their particular jurisdiction, and how they rule. So when if Shaka were to encounter the cat on the right, he might not say we both African. Why? Because when you talk about African, or even take it back further, when we go to this side here and we reference black and black, these things came about by external forces deciding to define who we are and what we are. And when we accept that definition of what others established for ourselves, we actually pigeonhole and put ourselves in a box. So in essence, yeah, Africa and Africans, because it depends on how we want to tie that back, by basically saying that all is, as we know it, the human race started in Africa. Or we can just reference the fact of certain aspects of skin tone. But again, it depends on your perception of how far you want to go down in what reference point or frame of reference you're using. To give you even further, go ahead, brother.
Real quick, I just wanted to touch on this because this happened to me on Sunday. I was at a Oceanside pier and I was taking some pictures, and this woman in a car, she said, "Hey, you." So I looked, I'm the only one out there. She's like, and she asked me, "Are you African? Are you American?" And I understood the question, but just looking at this, I'm like, wow, I have to really think about it what people are asking.
Yep. And then even to take this further, because the subject matter is we're talking about the logics of war, is depending on where you stand in terms of your superior dominance. You may look at the one on the left as being an African warrior who is in a position of dominance and power, whereas you may look at the one on the right as being a person When you look at the garb and you look at the dress and you look at the culture, you may look at a person who is assimilated, whereas it may be considered inferior. Again, we're talking perspective now. One operating from a position of self-defined culture, the other one operating from a position of assimilated culture. You see, again, we're all talking about perception. May not necessarily be that, but again, we're talking about perception, depending on where you stand. The last one, this one really brings it home. Somebody speak on that. What's some thoughts that come to mind? Anybody? Comrade Storm, you want to jump in? What do you care to jump in on this one? All right, I just talk about the first things that come to mind to the average person, depending on, again, how knowledgeable you are. To some people, the one on the left may look, unattractive. In that custom, having elongated lips is actually a symbol of beauty. The larger the ring is, the more powerful you are and the more beautiful you are to that specific tribe. But to an outsider, this may, bring about fear of somebody you want to deal with, which even has to go into why certain aspects of that custom and that culture was done that way, to prevent slave catching. On the right, you see a sister, and because of a lot of times here in the United States, our perception of beauty, we may look at this person as being the beautiful one, or the most appealing, or the most attractive. Again, it all depends on where you sit and what side you're coming from. Depending on where you are, you may look at the one on the left holding an AK as being a symbol of power, and the one on the right being symbolic of beauty, a symbol of possession. Because keep in mind, oftentimes, especially when you talk about the type of society that dominates us right now, symbols of beauty often are based upon acquired ownership. People look at women oftentimes as a centerpiece or a beauty piece, or something to show off, instead of what they actually, or a person can actually bring to the table. So in other words, we're judging it based on skin deep. We're not even looking or wanting to first find out what the person is about. Our perception has us to start making judgment calls based upon what we first encounter through our eyesight, without even opening their mouth and having something to say. We have these perceptions, and we have these things that go through our head that automatically make us want to think a certain way until we proven otherwise. And it's important that we recognize this, because what we're talking about when you go into the logics of war and the role perception plays in terms of dominance. So identity politics play into the way we perceive ourselves and the way we would like others to view us. And that's super important in today's time, because, and that's going to be a whole different class that we get into one day. But identity politics is what is creating a situation, especially as you deal with individuals, to where things are getting all miscombobulated and all turned around in terms of how we live our life, because of identity politics, how we view ourselves, what created that perception in terms of what we want to be identified with. For instance, and then I'm gonna move on to another subject. What do people put when asked, what are you? Would we normally say, hey, I'm black, African, queer, straight, gay, what do you lead with? That gets into identity politics because it's what I want to be perceived as first and foremost versus what I think of myself as well. All these things come into play. And as I navigate through this world and we deal with elements of warfare, especially on a microcosm level, my identity and how I want to be viewed and how I demand and expect to be viewed and recognized, tells a whole new story in terms of what's going on. And so let me keep moving here. But regarding perception with war, the nature of war is instinctive with the subconscious act of being territorial. Predators will protect the area in which they roam, roam from other animals of the same species. Typically, the only thing it finds as not a threat are the animals it identifies as potential prey or for mating. If you are occupying the same area as a known predator, either you are being hunted or you are hunting, which goes into what we refer to as the predator-prey polarity. Now, again, when we talk about this, we're dealing with this from the standpoint right now as we start off of natural law. If you look at the animal kingdom, again, things operate from this position of being territorial. That territory is considered to be my ownership or what I'm basically overseeing or in control of within the animal kingdom. Humanity does the same thing, but just on a greater scale. And we do the same thing to ourselves on a greater scale. So again, when you look at it from a position of polarity, which we're going to get into how that ties into extremism, which creates the environment for warfare, you'll recognize that when you talk about or you view something, the other person that's as either predator or prey, that determines or engages the idea of how we're going to deal with warfare. So if they're the prey, my approach is going to be entirely different than it's another equal predator. So we talk about now the dynamics of power as it applies to identifying with the next person. Now, what is logic? A particular method of reason as it applies to social engineering or patterns. Logic reflects a position of polarity. Within the reference of warfare, polarity creates right, wrong, good, bad, friend, foe, also known as extremes. Referencing the binary system. Now, why that's important when we talk about this from the position of binary system is because, again, through the lens of dealing with political education, politics is war. War is politics. It's also referred to as politics being war without bloodshed and war being war with bloodshed, or politics with bloodshed. So from that perspective, that introduced us into what's called a binary system. The same thing as you talk about when you primarily in this country deal with the two-party system. Although we have more than two parties, which ones are you always predominantly hearing about? Democrat or Republic? It operates through a binary system. Typically, they try to get people to vote and operate and think along party lines, either Democrat or Republic, one or the other. So it's like you have to pick a side. That is, in essence, the polarity and the binary system being utilized for the sake of causing you to draw a line in the sand. Drawing a line in the sand also puts you in a position of predator-prey relationships, which causes you at that point, again, to be able to ingest or inject yourself into a position of battle mode and how you want to operate. So through the lens of psychological warfare, you must frame your enemy as the opposite of you, which is what we're talking about. Therefore, Your side is right and an enemy is wrong. Your fight is a just cause representing righteousness, and the enemy is the axis of evil. Keeping the polarity in mind as we continue to discuss warfare, because again, all of this is coming from the position of one way or the other way. Because when you engage in warfare, either you allow things to be the way it is and you hold your ground, or you intrude upon another person's territory, or you protect your territory from someone else. But it's aspects of expansion or colonialization that we're addressing this from. Now, how does logistics play into this? Logistics is the branch of military science and operation dealing with the procurement, supply of equipment, also with movement, evacuation, hospitalization of personnel and troops, and with the provisions of facilities and services related to the matter of combat. In order to maintain the logistics of combat, an environment conducive and conductive to the justification must be manufactured. And let me break that down, because oftentimes you hear people refer to something being conducive, but not necessarily conductive. Conducive to warfare would go into the aspect of saying that the climate is right for there to be a war. Let's talk about that from the standpoint of what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine. You have a position now to where you have one country who wants to maintain its sovereignty and its independence, and you have another country who wants to impede upon that and implement their way of life and interject that within those particular borders or land mass. That is a conducive environment for war. A conductive environment for war has to do with the fact that you're talking about a condition that attracts warfare. Now, attracting warfare is completely different than being conducive to warfare, because attracting warfare means you also operating from a position of an environment that is perpetually putting you at war. To give you an example of a conductive environment for war, we can talk about Israel. Why? Because by it being the quote unquote holy land for the various world religions, it is constantly attracting people to encroach upon that territory and claim it as their territory, to claim themselves as being the ones who are the righteous ones or the chosen ones to occupy that land. And so therefore, it's always in a position of conductivity as it applies to attracting combat or attracting things that draw people in to fight one another. That is the difference here. And so both things here are dealing with, again, the justification of being manufactured. And it's important that we recognize what we mean when we say being manufactured, because war as a position of power flows through economics, period. There is money in warfare. And therefore, oftentimes, especially as it applies to governmental operations, these conditions for combat are manufactured or created. And that's important as we move forward in terms of recognizing the perception of how we see war being played out across the world. Now let's talk about the definition of war itself. A conflict carried on by forces of arms between nations or between parties within a nation, which we talked earlier about Democrat and Republic, mentioned that. Warfare as by land, sea, air, or space. Armed fighting as a science, profession, activity, or art. Methods or principles of waging armed conflict. War is a soldier's business, or simply put, war is a business. And so when you look at it as a business, then it should change the perspective and the perception of how you define what war is. Again, going back to the 3Ds that we talked about in the very beginning, that the trifecta that the Panther Party operates through, is when you, whatever defines you or whatever defines your perception is going to determine how you chart your work through that perception, or what we call developing your path. So your perception is based upon that. For instance, even going back to those examples we gave, the where we had the Zulu warrior on the left side and the brother in the suit and tie on the right side. As we implement and talk about war as a business, which one of those two images will come to mind? More than likely, the person wearing a suit and tie versus the one that is in combat or guard. Why? Because when we think business here in the United States, we think about a person dressing in suit and tie. When you typically go for a job interview, a lot of times it's regardless of what type of work you're going to do. Typically, what do people do? Put on a suit and tie. That is the conditioned model for business in terms of the attire. But when you look at that attire as a battle outfit, now you see the commonality that I asked at the very beginning between the Zulu warrior and the person in the suit and tie. What do they have in common? They're both wearing battlefield gear or battlefield suits. They're both gearing up for war. But the perception oftentimes causes us to see war as a business. So therefore we don't see the dress uniform of business operating from that perspective. But how often have you heard the comment that the pen is mightier than the sword, referencing the pen as being an equal weapon to a sword, or something that can go up against the sword? So when you think about it from that position, then the suit and tie makes all the sense in the world as to why that can be perceived as a battle dress uniform, as well as what the Zulu warrior had on for his combat scenario and situation. So drawing a perspective together in terms of what we consider to be war, now we need to open it up and look at it from the position of how do you engage in that situation. Now let's talk about the etymology of war. And I'm only going to just read the last sentence here. The word itself, meaning to confuse, to perplex, and to bring into confusion. That's where the word originated from, which makes all the sense in the world when you think about it, because we ask ourselves, why do we go to war? Why do we fight? Because again, we're not looking at it from the position of empowerment. Now this goes back into the pictures that I showed. The following books are found in the business sections of a bookstore: The Art of War, 33 Strategies of War, 48 Laws of Power. This reflects the culture of war played out through the microcosmic battlefields in preparation and assimilation of the corporation, which mirrors the government just on a smaller scale. A great deal of infrastructure civilizations benefit from came about by way of military logistical operations. Once a military or combat operation was no longer required, the roads, buildings, networks, and are repurposed for general use in order to help justify the need for the war effort that put them there in the first place. And that's where the concept can come into play when we talk about the end justifies the means. So again, when you go into a bookstore, maybe y'all have known this, the people out there listening know this, or maybe they didn't. You go into a bookstore and you think that certain things should be in a section that deals with military science. Well, that military science is also broken down into business, the business section of the bookstore. and is being applied to a corporate environment. So these books are written for a specific mentality, for you to engage and go to war. Now, what you have to look at that in terms of is what type of battlefield are you operating from? And that's the whole point. But it is a war. Now that goes into what we call the theater of war, which now we're talking about how we develop warfare or the pursuit of war. Remember when we had our 3Ds, we talked about define. You have to be able to perceive something so that you can define it. And then we talked about you have to be able to pursue in order to develop it. So now we're talking about the pursuit or the development of warfare, which goes into the theater of warfare, which is the entire area or zone in which ground, sea, air, and space forces may come directly employed in war operations. And that's the key word here, employed in war operations. Because when you think about, for instance, when the United States or any country, specifically, let's just talk about the United States, when troops hit the ground, those troops are property, quote unquote, based upon the contract you signed of the United States government. They are employed in order to engage in war operations. Again, if you are being employed to do something, no matter what you call it, if you're being employed, is that not business? So the business itself is warfare. You are getting a paycheck to go and kill, destroy, eradicate, take over land, whatever you want to call it. But in essence, go to war. You are being employed. It is a business. And when we see it like that, and when we see the business of war, then it changes our perspective in terms of what we identify with as a people in addressing our conditions. Now, this is where it gets sticky, and I want us to talk about this collectively here. Some examples of the microcosm feeding into the macrocosm business of war is SpaceX, the Boring Company, Neuralink, Starlink, OpenAI, and Tesla Bot. Now, anybody, what do all of those companies have in common? Going back to what we talked about earlier.
They're owned by the same person.
All by the same person. Now let's talk about how these all link up. And notice how the word link is used in multiple ventures. The primary beneficiary or benefactor of these businesses as a collective resource is the military industrial complex. A lot of people have not necessarily put those together within what those companies. So let's break that down so that we can really see what's going on. SpaceX will build efficient transport systems capable of addressing ballistic measures. Now, a lot of times the commercial aspect of SpaceX has to do with what? Being able to travel and put payloads up and ultimately be able to colonize Mars. And it's important that we recognize that it's an expansion of colonialization. The only difference at this point, as far as we know, is that it's not already occupied. So the position is, though, still expansion and colonialization to continue the efforts of expansion. What does a military do? Militaries expand the territory. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation project that is currently able to provide satellite internet access coverage to most of the planet. The constellation web contains over 1,700 satellites and will eventually consist of thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit. This cloud or web will be capable of not only providing consumer needs as a means to generate warfare, logistics, but addressing the application of the original Star Wars program by dominating space and capable of jamming other satellite signals, missile guiding systems, targeting systems, sea communication, navigation systems, etc. This link also serves to blanket the planet with unlimited communication visibility for the next level of AI, going into open AI. So, in other words, one of the things that we have to see now that we are seeing through the lenses of warfare, no matter where we're coming from, private or public sector, what you have to recognize is it is the applications of things that become weaponized. Going back to even when we first started off talking about the symbol or the light spectrum that we have been known to identify as black, and the word black itself to define or to refer back to that particular light spectrum. In saying that, how do we merge the two? How do we identify with what warfare is? How do we see it? Because if you don't see yourself at war, or if you don't see that other subject as being a threat, then your whole position changes. And oftentimes when the people are the prey, they don't see the predator as being of the same concern as the predator sees the prey of being a concern as to make sure of the availability. This is why in nature, predators are of a smaller segment, whereas prey is of a larger segment. When you apply that to the laws of humanity, now we're talking about why is it that the majority of the land, the majority of the wealth of the world is controlled by a small percentage of people. It goes into the same level of statistics that we talk about we see in a natural law, at a natural world, as it applies to predator or prey. Predators dominate a way larger amount of species, way larger amount of populace than the prey in terms of being on the other foot. So from that standpoint, to equal it out, you will have 100 prey to one predator. And so when we look at things from the natural perspective and what we see out in nature, it makes more sense as to why warfare, and it makes more sense as to why things are the way they are. Not justifying them being the way they are, but the point being is if we have a deeper insight into the perception of warfare, a deeper insight into how humanity mocks and emulates nature, then it helps us to be able to form proper defenses to deal with it, because we see it for what it is. And that's the thing, when we don't see things for what they are, which is the intent, then the prey does not identify with itself as being prey. Going back to identity politics, that's part of the trick in that. Open AI, let's continue talking about this part. Serves to master the artificial intelligence sector and open up capabilities addressing efficient or smart technologies. And a lot of us hadn't really started looking into smart technology. The only thing we think about is a smartphone for the masses. This leads to the full unification of smart city deployment. Most people are not aware of the applications already developed and in use to engineer our day-to-day lifestyle. The United States electrical power grid is controlled by smart systems. Most of the major water systems are using smart systems to efficiently route and maintain pressurization. The information highway, social media algorithms all lead to the Internet of Things that sit on the backbone of accessing public data. This access is by definition power. The information highway and public data is power. Now we get into what happens and the might that is developed just around Facebook. And we talk about that aspect of the billionaire. Now, how does this work into the Tesla bot? The Tesla bot deployment will first address the minimum wage labor workforce under the cloak of freeing up the masses to focus on higher level tasks, which, by the way, will collapse the current economic model in the workforce, thereby ushering in a national income system to pay out basic living salary to all citizens. Now let's stop there, because if you go back and if you were to go and watch some Elon Musk videos and interviews, you'll hear him constantly referring back to a national income system, because it is obvious that once robotics and automation replaces the work of the non-skilled laborer, and then as it starts moving up the ladder and replacing the skilled labor, you have a large population that is incapable of supplying itself an economic base in the framework of labor exchange for work, for physical work, which is what you get into when you talk about a job. I exchange my time on a job, putting something together, doing something for an economic currency or an exchange. Now, when you have a robot that can do that, what is it that I do? Again, the guys here are what it is being promoted as, is that now you can put your time toward higher level of things. You know, you don't have to deal with menial tasks. That's how you get the people to buy into it, because keep in mind, going into warfare from the standpoint of consumerism, in the position that we play as a prey to consumerism, especially within the Black community, how we are preyed into consumerism. This causes us to be in a position to where on the battlefield, you are the target. On the battlefield, you are the one that is being targeted for that purchase. You're the one that's being targeted to consume. So when it comes to that robot doing those specific jobs, now you are X out of that industry or that environment or that market. You're going to have so many people, which it would be millions of people, now not able to work or accommodate a workforce, because there's no workforce that can accommodate the loss of jobs that will be able, that will influx when we talk about this type of power coming into play, that the economy itself, the current economy model structure, would collapse because it is overpopulated and understaffed, and there's no need for that type of staff, and it is overpopulated. So what do you do with those people? This goes into the business of war again. Now on the back end, the Tesla bot will be engineered to limit the need of human casualties on the battlefield by seeking deployment in extreme hostile zones for peacekeeping. That is another element of operation or application that's being promoted. The bots will be using technologies of Starlink, SpaceX, Tesla Energy, and Neuralink as one self-contained unit. We will all be funding the logistics by way of projects like the Tesla phone, if you're familiar with that. Elon Musk is a real-life version of the fictional Tony Stark, and his industries, just like Stark Enterprises, are funding military-industrial complex through channels not visible by the general public. As the world's richest person, his net worth being over 200 billion, his taxes for 2021 alone amount to over 11 billion, which is greater than the gross national product of 63 countries. If you go back to the year 2018, is when I was doing the statistics on this. So that's saying a lot. This is one person's net worth that is greater than the gross national product of at least 63 countries. That is power. But again, the center of focus here is not on him. The center of focus is how a lot of times we don't see how the business model actually folds right into the nature of what warfare is and how it's played out on the world political scene. And so these industries are all tying into each other, all linking up into each other, and will serve the military industrial complex first and foremost. Although what makes it powerful and what makes it ingenious in terms of the way it's being portrayed is that the consumer market and the consumer products will continue to feed the operations, which will allow the military industrial complex to be ushered into this. And so what happens at this point is you now have, through the fact that you're combining these businesses, which goes into how small businesses are bought out by bigger businesses and so on and so forth. We can talk about the Walmarts and how as Walmarts come into a neighborhood, a lot of people say, ooh, now we get the opportunity to get jobs because the store is coming and they're building this big store. But what does it do to the small businesses? Oftentimes the small businesses go out of business, and whereas a business owner had their own corner store, now they end up having to become, if they're lucky, a manager at a Walmart. So what we find here is, from a warfare aspect, as it plays out through the business model, you have a conglomeration that is so intertwined with everyday living styles and lifestyles that it is too big to fail. And once it becomes too big to fail, now you're dealing with governmental justifications to make sure that it does not fold. And a lot of times how that is dealt with is through the military industrial complex, because you have to have a way to feed that. Anybody got any questions they want to add to that before I move on? Make sure y'all can hear me, right? At least give me we got you. All right, let's go into logistical war. The means of resource controlled via strategic and technical measures in order to implement the embedding of war. And now that's what's important here. Key is the embedding of war, because how do you channel war into a situation? That goes into what we refer to as logistical war. The nature of weaponization is expressed in operational choices, options, and decisions, which is fundamental to military lifestyle. Again, let me say that again. The nature of weaponization, because we have to recognize that what we're talking about now is how do you create a logistical war or create a condition to where we're talking about it being conducive and conductive to a warfare economy or a war-driven economy, so that the business of war can operate, can be justified, can move into position of operation, can break ground. That is the nature of weaponization. Therefore, understanding its nature is vital to infrastructure and institutional leaderships of all sectors, public and private. Two examples of books that get into the connection between what's normally referred to as military warfare, but also played out on the business scene. Sun Tzu, The Art of War for Managers. Sun Tzu, The Art of War for Digital Marketing. Everything can be applied in terms of warfare through different means of applications. When we think of warfare, oftentimes through our perception, through our mirror perception, we think of guns, or we think of soldiers in army uniforms, engaging in ground warfare. But warfare in itself, again, moves into the realm of business, is the realm of business. So the ground wars, or the military occupational aspect that we're traditionally familiar with, is one aspect of warfare. But warfare in itself operates all throughout areas of our life. And again, going back to the natural law and looking at nature, it's the same thing. Let's just talk about it from our human anatomy. when we talk about the blood cells, like the white blood cells, they go to war with anything that is alien that tries to enter the body. It's like a virus is going to fight it off. That is a element of your body going to war to protect the systems in itself. It's the same process, the same concept. But what creates an environment that is conducive to be attacked by that particular virus, as well as what creates an environment that is conductive for it. Now, conducive would be just a weakened immune system, whereas conductive would be a lifestyle that you live that constantly puts you in a condition of a weakening vessel, so that it's easy to be penetrated. It's favorably to be penetrated by a foreign host. So we have to recognize these things and how they play out on all areas of life and all areas of how we perceive things to be, because then it makes more sense about what's going on with war. So now we go into what's called psychological war, or psychops, the operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences, which is typically the unaware masses, that influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning. So when you talk about influencing objective reasoning, at this point, now we're talking about overpowering that logic that we addressed earlier when we talked about the binary system, all dealing with the title of today's topic, logics of war. So when you are able to defeat objective reasoning, now you're getting into a situation again to where you create a conductive environment for warfare. Because remember when we talk about the entomology of warfare, and basically we said it's a condition of chaos or confusion. Well, what happens when your body doesn't know what to do with this foreign substance? It looks at it, it says, oh, I think I want to attack it so that I can protect my vessel. But then it gets confused and it decides maybe it'll let it go through. And next thing you know, that virus is replicating or mimicking other elements within your system so that it can combine, grow, and get stronger and stronger. And now by the time that your white blood cells recognize this to be a threat to its system, it is too late and it is overtaking the host. That on the battlefield of warfare is also called a Trojan horse. Same thing that it applies to what we'll get into here next when we start talking about cyber warfare. That's the concept of the Trojan horse and how it's disguised in order to be able to move forward. Now, this deployment that we're talking about in terms of psychological warfare is typically played out through the CIA, which is the Central Intelligence Agency, the NSA, the FBI, and the Department of Defense, and other agencies. And they usually conduct these projects and programs that control the behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and individuals. It's important that we recognize this because quite often, the CIA, when you think about it, and the FBI, when people generally engage or see them, they're wearing a suit and tie. When they're not undercover, a lot of times what is their business or battlefield dress? A suit and tie. Going back to that image that I showed you earlier, to where most of us through our perception recognize a Zulu warrior as being a warrior. But when we look on the right side and we see someone in a suit and tie, we don't see that to be a CIA agent or someone who is even more ready and able to engage in war, because they deal with things more so from a psychological or psychops warfare perspective. And so this is important that we're able to see these dynamics. The purpose of the United States psychological operations is to induce or reinforce behaviors favorable to U.S. objectives. They are an important part of the range of diplomatic, informational, military, economic activities to maintain U.S. world power stability. Again, going back to the logics of war, or why it's logical to deal with warfare. Let's read that sentence again. They are important part of the range of diplomatic, information, military, economic activities to maintain the United States world power stability. So in other words, if in order for this system, and we can just bring this down to the microcosm again and just talk about the human vessel, in order for it to maintain its current state, and this is a state that we're comfortable in because this is my current state, in order to maintain that current state, we're talking about stability, state stability. Keep that in mind. Going back to governmental operations, it's a reason why stability, state, or start with that same STA. So as we address that and we look at that, when you talk about warfare and you talk about psychological operations, or you just talk about engaging, period, that vessel, the whole point is for it to be able to maintain its current stability of operation so that it can continue to live or continue to do what it does. So the United States is doing the same thing that our body or our systems do, or should I say the government is doing the same thing that our systems are doing naturally. Within the Black Panther Party, we refer to this as the mechanism structure. Through our mechanism structures, it is the embodiment or the systems that come together to create a cohesive environment for us to operate through a stable forefront in doing the work we do in the community. So as it applies to warfare, your systems must be able to operate recognizing how they have defined themselves, how they will develop themselves, and then how they would do what? Defend themselves, which is why the warfare element must come into recognition. Too often, we are taught to separate war or separate the conditions of combat from who we are and what we are. That is going into the binary system of thinking or operating as a prey versus operating from the recognition of predator-prey relationship. And when you don't do that, you close your perception to being attacked. So you don't recognize how you are attacked. And when we take this to a higher level of a field of view, it goes again into another trifecta that we talk about: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual element, as well as another trifecta would be the individual, the family, and the community as it is targeted through combat operations. So we have to be aware of how these systems come together and how they're attacked. Because if we don't see ourselves being at war or on a battlefield, then we are not prepared to address being in that type of scenario. It's no different than how if you're driving your vehicle down a road and all of a sudden another car is coming head on, chemicals are now rushed through your brain and prepare you to deal with what's about to happen. Or just say somebody jumps out of the bushes to attack you, your body will flood itself with certain chemicals in order to prepare you for what's called fight or flight. But if you are not recognizing that you are undergoing or about to be dealing with a threat, then you won't prepare yourself for it. And if you don't prepare yourself for it, you're not ready to engage from the perspective of warfare. Therefore, you will be the victim. Therefore, you will be the prey every single time. Now, let's go back to, again, addressing this from the trifecta. So looking at it that way, now all of a sudden, you are a victim or the prey to being attacked physically, mentally, and spiritually. So that's why it's key to recognize the logics of war. Psychops is utilized during both peacetime and conflict situations. Calibration is always in motion no matter what the title or name of the given project or program deployment. There are three main types of Psychops categories: strategic, operational, and tactical. A very good project of research is MK Ultra, and I sent a link here for you to look into MK Ultra and how that plays into a whole gambit of applications utilizing psychological warfare. And from that, is there any questions or anybody got any comments again? I want us to dialogue with one another. Anyone? For those that are out there, if you're on, if you are broadcasting live on Facebook, just jump on in, dial into the number. Jump on and I'll let you in. And then if you have a comment, a suggestion, or thought, or want to provide feedback, we'll go there. Now, this is just the image here in terms of what's referred to as in search for the Manchurian candidate, which goes into greater depths of psychological warfare. Now let's talk about another element of warfare here. Cyber war. The use of a digital systems attack against an enemy state in order to cripple or make vulnerable measures against critical computer systems that control the infrastructure, economic balance of the government or private business, often used to retrieve or destroy information. Now, what makes that important in terms of warfare and warfare strategy is how to fuel the society and the system through resources, and how warfare plays a significant role in that. And we refer back to, I think, a document called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And in addressing that document went into the level of warfare in terms of how it's played out on the power structure through economics and utilizing the laws of physics in order to address the different parts of a society. Now, when we talk about cyber warfare, this is going from an industrial complex or industrialization that particular body was spanning from, to an informational environment or society, where we are now, to where information rules our connections with one another, which goes into social media and the social lifestyle that we live, to where we're all into virtualization. The economic model that creates the linkage between the computer systems, and again, like when we talked about earlier, the smart cities and smart systems that interconnect our lives now, is just like if you walk down the street, how many people will you see looking down at their smartphones or their cell phones as they walk by? We're so integrated within these things, and in essence, we're like a cyborg. Most of us don't look at it that way, but in essence, that's what it is. We're so attached to these devices. We're so attached to our electronics. They are part of us. And oftentimes, when we want to interact with one another, the first thing we do is utilize a means of electronics communications in order to do so, quicker than we would in previous times, where we would literally go out and want to make a actual physical exchange with one person in order to communicate. And now, addressing things under this pandemic, it makes us even more so wanting to operate through a virtual environment to meet and greet, just like we're doing now, utilizing this platform to meet and greet each other and to build, instead of doing it face to face. So we have to understand how we are in embedding ourselves into these conditions, into these systems, and not recognizing that we are on a battlefield. And that is important, that we recognize the perspective of what's really going on. And so cyber warfare utilizes these crutches and these connections that we have formed to be now a needed part of our social structure in order to attack. And this here is just a document that was pulled from the that was pulled to just kind of go into that. But I'm not going to read this right now. But if you want a copy of the information that I'm sharing on the screen, just leave your email in the chat, and I'll take a look at that, and then I will shoot you a copy of it, because this is public information. This class is open to any and everybody. But it basically talks about how the information systems are used used to attack our government in terms of hacking it, and other countries are constantly targeting each other in terms of trying to cripple one another through cyber warfare, and how there is a difference in a collapse in terms of the United States military versus the federal government, as it applies to a balance in terms of how much I'm spending to attack other countries and attack outside systems versus how much money I'm spending to fortify my internal systems so that they are not attacked. And that goes into a certain element of balance. So here's a quote here. War is a series of catastrophic catastrophes which result in victory. And Albert Pike referenced that. Now, for those of you who don't know who Albert Pike was, he was a 33-degree Mason, a grandmaster Mason who was, heavily involved in writing and in literature and information, and raising up the should I say the level in which Masonry was introduced to a lot of people. But I just wanted to throw that out there in terms of a quote, because it's significant as to why it comes from him. Now let's talk about another element that most people take for granted, especially here in the United States. Strategic or nuclear warfare is a military conflict or political strategy which deploys nuclear weaponry. Nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction, in contrast to conventional warfare, which is what most people are familiar with. Nuclear warfare can produce destruction in a much shorter time and can have a long-lasting radiological results. The major nuclear exchange would have long-term effects, primarily from the fallout released, and could also lead to nuclear winter that could last for decades, centuries, or even millennia after the initial attack. This level of military might is what defines a country as a world power. And that's what's important, because oftentimes throughout the media and the news, you hear about the United States, or you hear about the UN coming against the country for attempting to develop strategic war powers or war abilities. Why is that? Because when you start talking about quote unquote weapons of mass destruction, those things are not to be taken lightly as it applies to the deployment of that for the sake of war. Warfare being a natural state or condition of humanity and of life, what controls the emotional aspect versus the logical aspect of how war is implemented, which is why we refer back to conventional warfare. It is much easier, obviously, in terms of long-term effects to deal with conventional warfare than it is dealing with strategic warfare. It's to basically look at it as being the difference between you getting into a fist fight with somebody and knocking them out versus pulling a gun and shooting them in the head. They're dead at that point. That's the end of the fight, and that's the end of them, and the consequences are way greater than it is if you just knock somebody out. So strategic warfare plays that position of world power that separates countries like the United States, China, Russia from others. The below chart is extracted from the 2021 Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory Strategic Arms Control and National Security Report. And what this does is show you And we've heard in the news oftentimes where they talk about hypersonic missiles. And what this is showing you is how dangerous that is in terms of dealing with strategic deployment using hypersonic guidance systems in terms of detection from a foreign or an enemy state. So the average ballistic missile has to go up into the atmosphere and then drop back down, and at that point is crossing radar detection, which is showing you is what the blue line is showing you. Whereas hypersonic weaponry is actually able to glide along the curvature of the earth at such a fast speed, it actually sits under the radar. And by the time the radar detects it, it is too late. It is already too close to the target to do anything about it. And so this is also in terms of the deployment of weapon systems as it applies with strategic power. This again even falls right back into what we talked about earlier with the different aspects of SpaceX and dealing with that technology. Because the problem here is as countries develop hypersonic deployment, it also gives them the ability to be able to not only have the strategic weapons or have, even when you talk about conventional warfare, have the ability to attack, but in the threat of attack, but they're able to carry it out before a counter attack or a counter strike can be deployed. And so this is why world powers constantly suppress, going back to knowing that you're at war, suppress other nations' ability to be able to operate from the same level of might. Let's just even look at this from a microcosm example. When the Black Panther Party in the 60s formed, it formed through the recognition that the laws gave us the right and equal access to be able to defend ourselves like anybody else in the country or anybody else under those specific laws. But we wasn't exercising that because we were basically being suppressed and oppressed from the recognition of our rights. Going back to the difference between hypersonic and ballistic trajectory. Once we identify with the fact that we have the same access, we have the same abilities, and we looked at ourselves as being equal versus looked at ourselves as being treated as inferiors, when we operate from a position of power. So in other words, cop got a gun, I got a gun. Now we are equals. If we both got guns, that puts us on an equal footing. So now we have to what? Negotiate. Because we both operate from the same position of power. Whereas if one person has a gun and the other person doesn't have a gun, it is an unequal position. And you are operating from a position of inferiority. So going back to us as a people, when we recognize our elements of might and our elements of power, then we are able to actually go to war in a position of empowerment and actually recognize the elements of war in which they're being played upon all of our daily lives, whether it's we're talking about the individual, whether we talk about the family, or whether we talk about the community. So knowing this, it changes the dynamic of the way in which we develop and defend our positions of who we are, what we are, where we are, when we are, and why we are. So it opens up our perspective. And that's truly super important in the essence of what I want you to get from this discussion, which is why we're talking about it as the logics of war. Now we talk about defending. First, we talked about defining, then we went into developing, and now we're talking about defending what warfare is. And that is typically done through several things, and one being sanctions, which is an action taken in order that a given force of a country obey international laws by limiting or stopping trade with that country, by not allowing economic aid for that country, etc. So in other words, you're creating a condition that forces that country through the fact that it was attached or was in a position of consuming something that it needed from you. Now all of a sudden you extract that, and those sanctions cause it to collapse. And see, this is what's important again when we went back early and we talked about psychops, psychological operations, and we talked about the element of how economics play into that. Because oftentimes, especially as it applies to a world power structure, when you have countries that rely upon other countries for foreign aid, and you have countries that are willing to give millions and billions of dollars in foreign aid, and then we're here in the United States, we sit back and we say, if the United States can give Israel $4.5 billion a year in order to fight the Palestinians in order to continue to protect their land, if we had that same level of access or resource and we kept it home, we could cure hunger. True. But what we're forgetting and not looking at in terms of the stability of world power, again, when we talk about our systems, the system that's intact now is stable. In other words, they are able to stabilize the position that we have within our place in the United States to a point to where it does not put the United States in jeopardy of being destroyed, overtaken, or changed. Whereas when you talk about the position you have on the world field and how other worlds perceive you and how other worlds interact, or not other worlds, but other countries interact within the United States, especially as you talk about goods and services and trades, it's a whole different dynamic. So that foreign aid that you're dealing with doesn't play the same purpose as obviously it would when we talk about curing and solving the problems here within the United States. The reason why they don't solve those problems is because it actually is it creates economic stability within the country to keep the people on the edge of always needing to consume, always staying at a certain level of economic hardship, so that they're constantly engaging in what? A wage war or the rat race. By having your people engage in that rat race, you occupy their time, you occupy their position, and you occupy their ability to what? Be involved in the political system, which is why we are teaching what we're teaching through the lens of political education. Once the people are politicized and once the people recognize their power and how that power can be utilized to free themselves, it changes the playing field big time and dramatically, because we as a people are able to now come together through a position of power and make and demand change and demand justice. But as long as we come from a position of inferiority, in a position that is lesser than having the ability to create a sanction within the confounds of what we're asking for, then we'll never get it, because then it becomes a handout. Now let's go back into that and talk about how sanctions are weapons or weaponized against countries in the first place. When you become reliant upon external means in order to build yourself up or maintain your systems to be stable, that means that in essence you're operating like a domesticated operation. Why? Because someone else is feeding you. You're being fed, and you're being fed according to how your behavior pattern is operating. As long as you do the tricks, as long as you do the things that I expect you to do, the things that I tell you to do, you will continue to receive this foreign aid. As long as you are obeying my interest. And as you obey my interest, what happens at that point is that I continue to feed you and you continue to consume. And as you continue to consume, what happens at that point is that at any given time, if you decide that you want to change the dynamics of what's happening and to change the dynamics of how things are being operated, I'm gonna pull these sanctions on against you and now strip you of that stability that I constantly feed you. And in doing so, it will cause you to go back into a collapsed state and a state of not being able to sustain your stability. And so therefore, you will go back into compliance. And so oftentimes we don't see how economics and how foreign aid is one of those things that is actually weaponized against us. Whereas, you know, taking a step back, you say, oh, they're feeding they're feeding the homeless, or they're helping to provide housing, or they're helping to give these people a sustainable environment. But on the flip side and on the backside, how did that condition in that land, in that environment, become conducive and conductive to warfare in the first place? Which brings in what? Foreign aid, which brings in the military, which brings in the infrastructure that builds up this place, and then they pull back. And what do they do now is they leave the structures in place for that society to utilize, you know, in a what was referred to as a peaceful time now. But it was all built off the back of a warfare strategy. And so that warfare strategy was deployed, and then now comes the foreign aid. Because what you're doing is you're balancing out the fact that you're slapping them on this side and then you're hugging them on this side. So it's a love-hate relationship. And the idea here is to keep a balance between the two, which is why, again, when you talk about the entomology of warfare, it is confusion. Because on one side of the fence, you're attacking me. On the other side of the fence, you're helping me out, or you're restoring the destruction that you created. It's like a physical and mental abuse, all given to you at the same time. And it's important that we see that, and we see how that is applied and operated through the position of a governmental status, all the way down to the position of an individual, in terms of the dysfunctionalities that we deal with on a day-to-day basis through the warfare that's played upon us as individuals that prevent us from strengthening our communities here in the United States. Now, the United States maintains sanctions on Russia related to the Russians' 2014 invasion of Ukraine, malicious cyber activities and influence operations, which include election interference. And we was aware of that just through what happened with President Trump when he was in office. Human rights abuse, use of chemical weapons, weapons proliferation, illicit trade with North Korea, support of governments of Syria, Venezuela, use of energy exports, and as a cohesive or political tool, and other harmful foreign activities. Sanctions against Russia, individuals, entities, vessels, and aircraft may include the blocking of assets subject to U.S. jurisdiction, limits on access to the U.S. Financial system, including transactions involving U.S. individuals and businesses. Because remember, war is a business, and that business is operated through corporations as well as individuals that are working through sole proprietorship, the same concept. And denial of entry into the United States. The United States also tightly controls exports to Russian defense and energy sectors. So this is an example of how sanctions were used. But keep in mind, depending on the amount of foreign aid or the amount of consumerism that I require from the person that I'm at war with in terms of trying to soft fight me through sanctions, is going to determine whether or not those work. Because if the sanctions don't work, then I just up it a notch, which goes into elements of embargoes. In order of a government prohibiting the departure of commercial ships from the ports and prohibiting or restricting freight transportation in order to create an economic impact against the target. So that's even taking it another step further. The plans of the United States, as discussed with allies in recent days, which was January 25th when I pulled this article, include cutting off Russia's largest financial institutions from the global transactions, imposing an embargo on American trade or American designed technology, which also goes back to a lot of times, and let me throw this little element in there. When Elon Musk was first developing SpaceX, he was getting missiles from, guess where? Russia. Yeah, think about that now. Again, American-made design technology needed for defense-related or consumer industries and arming insurgents in Ukraine who would conduct what would amount to as guerrilla warfare against Russia, military occupation, if it comes to that. And oftentimes, when we don't recognize this, but when the CIA involves itself in an operation, you hear them say military advisors. When the United States send in military advisors, basically what they're talking about is they're training another country or advising another country on how to go to war. They're preparing them to be able to fight the fight that they want them to fight, but without actually, quote unquote, getting our hands dirty. So what we're doing, and what the United States is doing in that perspective, is advising. And advising also means that I'm providing you the technology, I'm providing you the weapons, I'm providing you the resources, I'm providing you the tools to engage this war. But I'm not actually doing the physical war myself. So therefore, I'm just an advisor. And see, you have to recognize how the wordplay is on the chessboard. Such moves are rarely telegraphed in advance, but with the negotiations looming and the fate of Europe's post-war borders and NATO's military presence on the continent at stake, President Biden advisors say they are trying to signal Putin exactly what he is basically facing at home and abroad in hopes of influencing his decisions in the coming weeks. So this is what's taking place here. And Cuba is even wrapped up in all of this, because going back to the Cold War of the 60s, and what happened is Russia tried to basically create operations with Cuba so that they can put their militaries closer to the United States. And this goes back to what we talked about within that strategic positioning of yourself, to where in the event of taking things to the nuclear level, or utilizing weapons at that level of destruction, you are closer to your target. And see, what a lot of people don't recognize in terms of naval warfare, the whole idea of submarines is, in essence, to be able to go in international waters and actually sit and operate within the shores of enemy targets in order to be able to deploy strategic ballistic missiles at a moment's notice, undetected. Does somebody have a question or something they want to say? All right, I keep going. We're almost done here, actually. Tariffs, a schedule of duties imposed by a government on import or in some countries exporting of goods. The goods trade deficit, and there's go another part I pulled. The good trades deficit rose 3% to an all-time high to 1.1 billion last month. It was also the first time that the deficit breached the 100 billion threshold. The rebuilding inventories could keep the goods trade deficit wide at least through the first half of the year. Goods imported increased to 2% to 2.5 $258 billion, likely as a backlog of ports. The ports continue to be cleared. This increase of imports was driven by the capital goods, motor vehicles, and consumer goods, but imports of food and industrial supplies declined. Now, this also goes back to, and this hits home as well, if y'all are not aware of the fact that the supply chain has been disrupted, and a lot of that is being felt right there in LA, in the ports of LA. And not only that, but it is to a point to where obviously the lower end of people that are on the economic scale, especially in LA, have now started. A lot of people have started actually breaking into the trains and breaking into a lot of the supply things that are moving through there, and that has been shown on the news. So where you see all these Amazon packages all up and down the railroad, busted boxes all busted all open. See, as the United States starts feeling the impact, and obviously it happens first with the lower economic class, as we start feeling the impact of all of the things that are going on as it applies to warfare, because that's what we're talking about. Warfare, it affects and creates a condition of chaos. Again, what is war? When we talk about the entomology, it is that confusion. That confusion and that stir up is what creates a conducive environment for war. So we have to recognize this is the condition in the state in which we are operating. Now, this is another article here. The World Trade Organization said that China can retaliate against a $645 million worth of annual United States export, part of a decade-old trade dispute over U.S. anti-subsidy duties on Chinese goods. The World Trade Organization granted Beijing a new tariff weapon against the United States during a politically sensitive moment for Biden administration, almost a year into a situation in which trade war between the two largest economies. So here we are dealing with a type of warfare situation with Russia, and now all of a sudden there's an advantage that China would have in terms of trying to also attack while we're trying to attack somebody. And see, that goes back to that whole predator-prey dynamic. So keep that in mind. On Wednesday, the World Trade Arbitrator out of Geneva said China can retaliate against $645 million worth of annual American exports as part of a decade-old trade dispute, which is like we said earlier. This amount was much less than the $2.4 billion that China had initially requested legal authorities to target. And that's important when you think about it. Initially, they was pushing for 2.4 billion, but they got 645 million. But the point is the World Trade Organization allowed a tariff to be utilized against the United States. And see, these kind of things oftentimes are not talked about to the general public, and a lot of times we're unaware of what's actually going on how these different levels of warfare are actually being played right here in our backyard, while we as individuals and families and communities suffer with certain elements of oppression. The oppressor suffers with certain elements of oppression. It's a dynamic. It's a revolving dynamic. And again, that goes into how certain parts of stability are kept in order to try to keep the capitalistic engine intact. So the power of war. Now, this is how we go into closing with this situation. Access to have full control over routes of trade via oceans, seas, canals, port, and ports of entry. That's, and then in other words, when we say the power of war, we're talking about how war is operated through, and what is the reasoning and the end result of what you want through a war and through a position of empowerment. You want full access. booty or spoils of war. The idea of spoils of war date back to ancient times when soldiers and sailors were paid shares of whatever treasure were captured in battle. In some armies, the troops were not paid at all, but expected to serve with the spoils of war, furnishing their reward. Now, the thing is, in the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949, it prohibit the looting of civilian property during wartime. And so right here, I just wrote some of the United States Military Justice Code that talks about that. But this is one thing I want to bring up. This here, I pulled this from an article. During Operation Desert Storm, thousands of Kafrum inscribed tablets, which we're talking about ancient Samaritan texts and ancient Samaritan art and artifacts, which are worth millions of dollars. Cylinder seals and stone statues had illegally made their way to a lucrative antique market in London, Geneva, and New York. Irreplaceable artifacts that had been purchased for less than $100 on eBay. So we're talking about now, and this goes back to the spoils of war. And there was even a movie that talked about that showed, from a fictional side, but showed some of the same thing. And I can't remember the name of the movie, but Ice Cube played in the movie, and it was showing how these soldiers in Iraq was basically trying to steal gold in the middle of a war. And in addressing that, the thing that we're talking about as it applies to this is how basically the different elements of war are driven to operate a certain way. And so this goes into the spoils of war, which entices the people that are fighting the war, the ones that are on the ground, the ones that are getting their hands dirty, to continue forward outside of patriotic positioning. Because patriotism only goes so far once you are crossing, over into a position of dealing with a hostile environment. And especially when you start looking at it from the position of how do you justify your giving your life for this? Like, for instance, when you deal with the war of Iraq in terms of basically being about oil. Well, do I see my life being able to be taken, or I giving my life for the sake of us fighting for oil? And again, you have to look at that in terms of the stability that the country relies upon certain assets for the sake of what? The current stability and current condition of keeping the capitalistic machine running. And so as we better understand the gears of capitalism, it gives us an ability to pierce into the vulnerabilities of the structure, the vulnerabilities of the environment that we're in, as well as knowing that we are at war and how to prepare ourselves, whether we talk about it through an individual, family, or community level, as well as, like I said, physical, mental, and spiritual level, so that we are able to be prepared and form the proper defense for that war. Now, the last and most powerful aspect of this is land. The tangible earth in which society is constructed, giving way to natural resources, wealth, infrastructure, which also includes the below as well as the above area of the land, underground, waterway skies, and space orbits. And that is where things are heading now, going back to what we talked about with SpaceX, and we talk about how the programs of dealing with those different operations tie into controlling, through Starlink, controlling the satellites and controlling the space orbits. Because when you operate to a position to where you can be anywhere on the globe and see every single thing that's happening at any point on the globe at any time, now you are literally dealing with that all-seeing eye that people used to refer to or still refer to in terms of the Illuminati. So we're talking about a position now to where everything is being monitored, everything is being on the watch. And then when you couple that with the other technological advances like the open AI, the Tesla bot, Tesla Energy, and then you go into even talking about his boring company that deals with going underground and setting up infrastructure there. You got, it's all covered. It's all covered. And when it comes to military power and when it comes to warfare, that's the whole point, is to have all of your different terrains under one control. And so land is basically the bottom line. It is through control of land that all power is logistically maintained as it applies to nation building, self-determination, and sovereignty. It's all about the land. Now we want to talk about the definition of a contested zone. A zone under oppressive control that at any time becomes a contested area if the revolutionary forces in activity there are either on the verge of armed struggle or have reached an advanced stage of revolutionary organization. In some cases, a spark is enough to determine the turning point for preparation to action. In other circumstances, the embers can smolder on the ground for a much longer period. Now, so when we talk about a contested zone, we are talking about the position in which that land is currently occupied. Now, liberated zone, a zone where independence was secured through armed struggle or through a positive action movement representing the majority of the population under the leadership of anti-imperialist or well-organized mass party. So what we're talking about now is these two terminologies from the standpoint of addressing capitalism as it applies to dealing with the engine or the logics of warfare going into land. So, in closing here, the point to this discussion is to build, is to harness your deeper insight into how the world of humanity operates, thereby giving you a greater chance to identify your sheep card. This way, your power to define, develop, and defend against influences can be more productive. If nothing else, you should at least level up your sheep card. And why I'm calling it a sheep card is basically stating that when you talk about or go into what's referred to as COINTELPRO, when you talk about preventing the masses from waking up, or you talk about keeping our people asleep, and you talk about sheep, you're talking about victims. You're talking about people that are operating from a position of prey. So this is like you hear people say sheeple. This is the sheeple mentality. So operating like a sheep, we're saying up your game, at least up your sheep card and become a higher level on the pecking order of being a sheep. But in essence, what we want is our people to wake up, period. The year 2022 is a year to weaponize benchmark extremism through race, identity, tax bracketing by implementing patterns of mental polarization as a source code for future generations. Now, when we started out this discussion, we went into a little bit about polarization and how all of that creates the backing for warfare to take place. It creates the position for you to choose what was referred to as a lesser of two evils, which is you stripping yourself of your actual choices and being left with options. So no matter which option you pick, you are picking one that plays into the hand of the one that puts you in that position of dominance in the first place, because choice was stripped from you. And by choice being stripped from you, you're dealing with, again, that polarization of no matter what you pick or how you pick it, you are operating under the guise of being entrapped. So this is not knowing that you in a state of warfare, again, which is defined through talking about how chaos and confusion comes into play. So operating in a confused state, which is a dysfunctional state. So this is what happens to us when we don't identify, again, identity politics, identify with the environment in which we are living on. So when we're not identifying with the environment, we're not at one with that environment, and we don't see what's going on around us, and we operate through an inferior lenses, it puts us at a position to where, again, we're talking about sheeple. It puts us at a position where we don't recognize the actual battlefield in which we're operating from. And so we have to see what's really going on. So the logics of the discussion here in terms of logics of war is based around opening us up and opening our awareness up to what's really taking place in not only just in the United States, but just in general as it applies to humanity on the current course, self-destructive course that we're all geared toward. Now, I left here again. If you want a copy of the documentation, just shoot. If you're on the broadcast right now, just shoot the email in the chat group. Otherwise, if you're watching us through Facebook or YouTube, just leave a message on that platform, and then I can make sure you get a copy of this. So some resource links to some of the things we talked about are included right here. And so I wanted to throw that out there. And I definitely wanted to give a shout out to the Panther 48. So our channel starts right here at the top of the link, and on the Panther 48 channel, we get into some intellectual engagements about various things that are going on and perspectives that we must have in order to be more consciously awoke of what's really happening to our people. So going into this, a proverb: give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime, is an outdated proverb. Without ownership of the resources, lakes, an embargo can be placed on access to the lake, rendering your ability to fish useless. So the old saying of dealing with giving a man a fish or teaching him how to fish has to be changed. And so here's just an image I pulled showing J. Edgar Hoover pulling puppet strings that was dealt with back in the late 60s, as it applies to between the Panther Party and the US organization. But that same imagery applies to what happens when you deal with polarization, whether you're talking about a war of races, a war of sexes, a war of economic statuses. The whole point is who's pulling the strings. They're controlling both sides of the dynamic, and that's that polarization I'm talking about. And this goes back to, again, that minority group that controls the majority of the wealth on the world. So how long are we going to continue to allow ourselves to be puppets on the string? So in closing, we say all power to the people, stay woke and get off those strings. Any questions with anybody? All right, if nobody has any questions or anything to say, that concludes the class. And again, if you want a copy of it, just make sure you reach out to us either through our Facebook page, Black Panther Party San Diego, or reach out to us on our website, or reach out to us, through whatever social media. We're also on Instagram. With that being said, all power to the people.
The lips of wisdom are closed. Except to the ears of understanding. The all is mind.
The red pill. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. And the so-called Negro is still knocking on the doors of the White House today, begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. begging for civil rights, begging for civil rights.
The all is mind.
Whether it be begging for civil rights from the Democrats or the Republicans, he is still begging for that which he was supposed to have got when Abraham Lincoln issued the so-called Emancipation Proclamation.
You think he was just thinking of the white man?
Lincoln, according to history, stated that if he could stop the so-called Civil War without freeing the slaves, he would. If he could save the Union by freeing the slaves, he would. He wasn't interested in freeing slaves. According to history, Mr. Lincoln was interested in saving the Union. And today, many so-called Negroes who don't read take Mr. Lincoln as their friend. But if you set them free, why are they still begging for civil rights? To me, civil rights means citizenship. If a man doesn't have civil rights, he's not a citizen.
You have to see it for yourself.
Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed.
Begging for civil rights.
Whatever you want.
Begging for civil rights.
You take the red pill.
Begging for civil rights.
You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Once you change your thought pattern, you change your attitude.
All I'm offering is the truth. Nothing.
Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights.
Correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so
Begging for
above.
civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights.
Because we're living in a new day.
Change your thought pattern.
Our people are now a new people.
Change your attitude.
No more fear
Begging for
of
civil
anyone.
rights. Begging for civil rights.
This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of being and life.
Because we're living in a new day. Our people are now a new people. That old Uncle Tom type
Begging
Negro
for
is
civil
dead.
rights.
Our people have no more fear of anyone. No more fear of anything. We are not afraid to go to jail. We are not afraid to give our very life itself. And we're not afraid to take the lives of those who try to
Begging
take
for
our
civil
lives.
rights.
We believe in a fair exchange.
Begging for civil rights.
We believe in a fair exchange. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a head for a head, and a life for a life. If this is the price of freedom, we won't hesitate to pay the
Begging
price.
for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for
Because we're living in a new day.
Change your thought pattern.
Our people are now a new people.
Change your attitude.
No more fear of anyone.
The lips of wisdom are
Begging for
closed.
civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging for civil rights. Begging.
Except to the ears of understanding.